Sorry. Let's see what.
I will stop my clock.
Let's stop recording. Let's see what happened with her. She's back. She's back. Hello, Genaina. Is all right? Let's see what. Her video is on.
No audio.
Is that all right, Genaina? Can we start? Can we keep on? Yes. Can you hear, Leonardo?
Yes, but she's not. Her microphone is not on.
Yes, your microphone is off. We cannot listen.
There is a microphone sign in the bottom of the screen. You need to turn it on.
Maybe Celia needs to do it.
No, it's her.
Below the presentation, there is a headphone sign.
Did you find it? There is a phone.
In my case, Celia, I didn't do anything.
No?
You did.
I didn't.
You also have to connect with the microphone, not just with the
Let
headphone.
me see.
Or Leonardo should do.
Genaina.
Below the screen, the presentation,
she has
there is a earphone sign. You click on it, shut down your
I think you need to do, Professor Celia. That's what.
Leonardo, eu não fiz. Foi a Célia que fez, eu acho.
I didn't do anything with you.
Neither did I.
Come on, Genaina. There is a phone.
Click on the phone sign, earphone.
In the screen,
below
down below the presentation, there is a phone there. Just click there, and then you activate your sound.
Beside the camera sign.
Não é o fone, é o...
Não.
O botão verde mesmo.
Tem um botãozinho embaixo da apresentação, Genaina.
Green button.
Ela não tem, professora, ela está falando.
Like me.
Ela está mandando, mas quando ela for falar, eu não vou escutar nada. Aí a gente não vai escutar nada que ela vai falar. Bom, vai assim mesmo? Vai, Genaina. Ela tá pedindo para esperar.
Acho que ela tá.
Come on, Genaina. Her microphone is not working.
Acho que ela vai sair e vai entrar de novo.
Do you have another microphone? Ai, meu Deus. Eu vou parar a gravação. Yes, I restart the recording. Okay, good luck. You can start again.
So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you again. Thank you for being part of my qualify exam. And the title of my research is a method for evaluating plan recovery strategy in dynamic multi-agent environments. The reason that I decided to study this topic is because I believe that everything that we do, somehow we are doing some plan activity. For example, tomorrow, today in the morning, when we decide to join this meeting, we need to decide the actions that we need to perform to be part of this meeting. Or, for example, in the morning when we decide to go to university or go to work, we need to decide the directions that we need to take according to the informations or the effects that our action we expect to perform. So we are talking about a way to perform a deliberative acting, because we decide which actions we need to perform to achieve a target, a point, or even a goal. And this planning activity can be performed before the execution of the actions or during the execution. And also this planning activity can be performed by a single agent, a single person, or a robot, or in a group of agents. And when we are talking about a group of agents in planning, we are talking about multi-agent planning. And a definition of multi-agent planning can be understood as the planning responsibility and the execution capabilities when they are distributed among more than just one agent. And there are a lot of models that deal with multi-agent planning. and they assume some characteristics. They try to, in these models, for example, they assume that agents have a perfect knowledge of the environments and the actions are deterministic, so they always achieve the same effect. And the models also assume that the changes in the environment are always performed after the execution of an agent action. That's the only reason. But when we are talking about real-world problem, and the world's not so simple. For example, in a real world, we have some unexpected events that may happen during the execution that may lead to a failure, and the plan cannot be executed anymore. So one big problem in the multi-agent models, it's related to the fact that planning is performed in an offline stage before the execution, and in this case we are talking about cooperative multi-agent planning. And there are some models too that try to work with planning in a changing environment. So we are trying to integrate planning and execution with cooperative agents, but in a full integration step, when we are talking about online planning, we are trying to integrate planning, coordination, and executions to perform actions in a real-time environment. But when we put together planning, coordination, and executions, we may suffer from unexpected events that may invalidate a previous plan. And these failures, these unexpected events, it's what we call a failure. So, with this context, we designed a fundamental question that what's the performance of plan recovery strategy, considering the features of the dynamic environments. Then we divided these questions in 3 research questions. The first one, what might be the best plan recovery strategy, considering dynamic multi-agent environments affected by state perturbation? And the second research question, we intend to study what happens when an action that was planned is not executed, is removed from the dynamic environment. And in the third research question, it's about the agent removal. And that's, we think that's a big contribution of our work, because in multi-agent systems, and we are talking about multi-agent systems because we are dealing with multi-agent planning, an important failure that may happen is when an agent is removed from the environment. So our goal is to develop a method to evaluate the plan recovery strategy in dynamic environments, considering both coordination complexity that is derived from the agent relationship level, and also considering the problems that may happen during the execution, for example, failures. So to present our work, I will follow this outline. First of all, I will talk a little bit about the related work that I studied that guide our decisions until now. I will show our proposed method, the simulation planning platform that we need to develop, and we are working on it until now. The evaluation decisions that we made to check the performance of the recovery strategy using the simulations data. Then we check the first research questions, and we start the initial study about regression models to be used in the simulation, and we will highlight some requirements that we need to perform to answer the second and the third research question. And finally, I will do some final remarks about the current state of our work, and to show what we did and what we intend to do in the next steps of our work. So about related work, we did 2 literature review. The first one I finished in 2017 in my previous course, and I decided to study to understand the main characteristics of multi-agent planning. And then when I finished this study, I found another work that was published that was working with the same topic, multi-agent planning and the characteristics of multi-agent planning. Then I could merge all the works. Then I understood that the main characteristics of this kind of model, they are talking about the agent distribution, the role that the agents play in the model, if they are planner and executors or just executors, how the planning process is performed if in a centralized approach or a distributed approach, how the planning process is integrated with coordination in an interleaved or unthreaded way, if we perform a planning and just after we do the coordination, or if we are doing planning and coordination together. The communication mechanisms, it depends on the computational process, if it's internal or external. The heuristics that are used to guide the planning process, if they use just local or global information. And finally, if agents, somehow they exchange some kind of information during the planning process, if they keep the privacy of their information. And when we finish this study of both reviews, we could highlight that there was a common suggestion of future work, that was the integration of planning and execution in dynamic environments. And that's why we decided to study this topic. Then we started a third literature review to understand the characteristics of planning, multi-agent planning in dynamic environments. So the first challenge was to define the right question to do to find the works. Then I started to think and to search with multi-agent planning for dynamic environments. Then I changed it to online multi-agent planning. Then I found that the best question to do was multi-agent plan repairing. And with these questions, I could highlight and list interesting work about the topic. Then this review I've been doing since last year. Then it's a process that's continuing. I'll never stop until the end of my work. So when we list the works, we could understand that there are different kind of failures that work try to deal with. The first one, there are works that try to work with an action removal, an action that was planned but was not performed, or the environment may be updated as a perturbation, that a change in the environment that was not carried out by a fact of an action. There are also works that try to study the goal modification during the execution, or the costs of the action that is updated during execution too. We have some works that also study new requests during execution or new items. It can be understood as the first and the second works, like new requests, it's a goal modification, and the new items is somehow like a state perturbation. We have problems also considering the precondition failure, when a precondition is not satisfied anymore and in action it's impossible to be performed. We have models that try to study this dynamic environments using optimization problem and probabilistic models. And we have problems also, failure that are caused by an action failure during execution. So one important conclusion from this list of related work is that they study different kind of failures, but they use somehow common strategies with different names but similar things. The related work try to use the replan strategy, when we flush the old plan and build a new sequence from the current state until the goal state. Or we use the repair strategy, when we just try to reuse the fragments of a previous plan. This is the common strategy that is listed in the common work. So when we compare all the related work, we can see that the planning process can be performed only by one agent here in this first column, or by many agents. The computational process in the most of work is performed in a centralized approach, and the communication is an internal process too. About heuristics, most works use a local heuristics to guide the planning process. But here, an important point, it's when we consider the failure that the work studied, almost the most part of work try to study changes about the environment's failure, about the state of the environment, or considering the actions. But there's no studies about agent removal. And when we are talking about multi-agent planning, as I said in the beginning, we are talking about multi-agent system. It's an important failure to be treated, because agents can be removed from the environment. So with these characteristics, we decided to propose our method, and this method, it depends on a pipeline of activities that's based on simulation, recovery, and evaluation here. Then we need to simulate the planning problem, the execution, and in some part of the simulation, we need to cause some failures to start the recovery process. And as our intention is to check the performance of the recovery strategy in this dynamic environment, we need to simulate a lot of different configurations, a lot of experiments. Then after that, with all the simulation data, we can perform an evaluation step. So our pipeline is divided in 3 steps. The first step about simulation, it is yellow square. So the user defines some simulation and planning problem parameters, and this planning problem is encoded to make the process of planning easier. And we need to define the initial stage, the goal stage, the available actions, and we also need to check the simulation parameters. And with all the simulation parameters and the planning problem, we start our simulation environment, and in this simulation environment, agents start to work in a loop. When the agent checks the next available action that needs to be performed, and the agent also needs to check the environment state to see if there was some failure. Then, if there was a failure, the agent will start a recover process. And during this loop, all the simulation data is collected, and when this loop ends, when the problem is solved, or a timeout of the simulation is reached, we start the last part of our method, that is the evaluation part, when we collect all the data and make some dashboards, some reports, or statistical metrics about the simulation. And we deliver all these metrics to the user to find our simulation. And as I said, to perform all the simulations, we need to build a platform to run the simulations. And in this platform, we run 4 different activities: the planning activities, the red square; the coordination activities, the green square; and the blue one, it's about activities of execution, action execution. And the orange one, it's about the reconfiguration, what we need to do when a failure happens. Our platform uses 3 different layers. The first one is the coordinator, and the coordinator talks with agents, and the agents are the layer where the execution is performed, and coordinator and agents uses a simulation layer with a message bus to provide conditions to agents talk with the coordinator. And the simulation layer also simulate failures too in this noisy handler component, update the states of the environment after the execution of an action in this action handler component, and there is a component that controls the simulation itself. And during the simulation, as I said, all the data of the simulation is collected. Our input depends on the configuration, the experiment that we need to run, the strategy that is used, replan or repair strategy, a timeout just to guarantee that the simulation will end, and a failure probability. Output is the plan, the planning time that was spent during the simulation, how many failure if the problem was succeeded, the goal was achieved, and the number of simulation steps. So the coordinator layer, to build this coordinator layer, we used a PDDL for Java library tool. It's a library for planning. We use it, but we need to improve it because we need to provide conditions to perform the repair strategy, and that was not in a original condition of the library, so we need to improve the code. And the coordinator, as it's the principal part of planning, this layer, this agent, has the ability to check if there is a possibility to find a solution. It performs the planning activity with a planner that is guaranteed with the PDDL for Java. And after a solution is found, the coordinator divides the multi-agent planning into single-agent plans and sends these plans to the agents. Coordinator needs also to have a message handler to deal about the exchange information with the agents. The agent layer, agents are executor, and as I said, coordinator is the planning agent. So here the agent just needs to check the environment state and check the next available action to be performed in its previous plan, and exchange message with the coordinator to ask for help when there is a failure or to update its plan after a failure. So in the beginning, we understood that we needed to provide to build a simulation tool, and we started searching for possibilities. But when we started the search, we knew that we need to use some agent-based platform tools, and this possibility needed to be flexible enough to receive planning inputs, because that was the input that we need to use. As we need to perform a lot of simulations, so we also search for solutions for batch simulations to run a lot of simulations with just one start. And also we need to summarize all these results. And in this sense, we found the Repass Symphony tool. It's very easy to use. It's based on Java too, so it was easy to integrate with PDDL for Java planning tool. And this simulation tool just needs to update cause some failure during the simulation in the environment. So there is a noise handler that just deals with this task. The action handler that updates the environment after the execution of an action, and the controller of the simulation. So here is just a picture to describe how the simulation happens, just an example. So after the user defined the inputs, the planning problem is encoded, and this problem is sent to the coordinator. Then the coordinator checks if there is a solution. When there's no solution, the simulation just ends because there's nothing to do. There's no plan to simulate. But when a plan is found, this plan is divided into this multi-agent plan. It's divided in different single-agent plan, and all these plans are sent and together with the planning problem to the agents, and then agents start the execution loop here. The agent checks the environments, checks the next action that it's available to be performed, and start this loop. When there's no no more actions to be performed. Agent just to send a message to the coordinator saying that, okay, I finished my work, there's nothing else to do. But it's possible too that during the execution loop, agent detects a failure, and when this happens, this agent will send a failure signal to the coordinator to ask for help. Then the coordinator will start the process again to find another plan and coordinate the activities with other agents. And this loop will finish when the problem is solved or when a timeout is reached, just to guarantee that the simulation ends. So when we finish the initial part of the developing our platform, simulation platform, we start to think about the evaluation part. Then we need to decide the way that we would evaluate the results. So we decide to use the action concept to put similar problems together. So when we are talking about actions, we can see actions as private actions. Then these actions only do not affect or depend on other agent actions, but we have also public action that, in this case, these actions, these public actions, affect or depend on other actions. We have, for example, a logistic problem. Then we have a lot of public actions in this case. And if we use this concept of private and public action, we can somehow define a coordination complexity to find a solution from the problem. Then we use this concept of public actions to build classes of problems, to put similar problems together. Then we build clusters. We check the best configurations of cluster using the silhouette approach. Then we tested clusters from 2 until 6 clusters. Then we saw that the best configurations was to use 3 clusters, and somehow it was expected because we have problems with a few number of public actions. It's more or less it's a problem that's easier, the coordination. We have problems also with a big amount of public action, and this kind of problems requires a coordination complexity attention here. And we have some intermediate problem too. So with this definition of cluster, we define 3 clusters. The first one using satellite and xeno-travel domains, our case studies. And in this cluster, we consider a losing level of coupling. The second cluster, we use the rover and the logistic problems with an intermediate level of coupling according to the number of public actions. And the last one, driver log and text, is a tightly coupled domain, a tightly coupling level. So with this class of problem, we start to evaluate the data and to answer the first research question about the performance recovery strategies when they are simulated in an environment only affected by state perturbation. And just to put an overview here about the simulations, just to do this evaluation part, on the case that I really use it to collect data, I run almost 11,000 of simulations, almost 200 hours of simulation, just the things that go right, okay, it's what's fine, and I really use it. There are a lot of more simulations that I need to perform just to prepare the simulation tool to the simulation. I used 10 different configurations from each domain, and from each configuration I run 10 times each configuration. So each configuration I run 10 different simulations. I needed to use a timeout condition just to guarantee that the simulation will end, because I realized that there was a part of the work that I spent 1 week just on one simulation, because with a higher failure probability, the simulation never stopped. So it's continued 1 week and never stopped. Then I decided I need somehow to define a condition. Then I use this timeout that I intend to increase both the timeout and the number of the simulations of each configuration. So when we start to evaluate the data from the first cluster, we could realize that the repair strategy, the blue column, build bigger plans. Here we can see that bigger plans, but it was faster than replanning. And the replanning strategy build better plans with a small number of actions, but it took more time to perform this planning activity in this cluster class, the first cluster of the problem. And the second cluster, in an intermediate level of coupling with a medium level of public actions, the behavior was somehow kept. We have repairing, building bigger plans in a small amount of time, and replanning. Also, continue building better plans with a small number of actions, but it took more time. But when we saw the third cluster with the problem with a high number of public actions, the behavior changed. Now we have replanning. Replanning is the best strategy to be performed because it generates small plans with a small number of actions, and also faster than the repairing strategy. So here we could draw some partial conclusions about the first research question about performance of recovery strategies, that considering planning time, replanning is faster when the problem is tightly coupled, when we have a higher number of public actions. But when we are considering the number of actions, the plan length, replanning always build smaller and better plans. And when we finish this first evaluation about the first research question, we start to think about, okay, we have some data, but can we use this data to somehow to predict the simulation outputs of our model, our platform? Then we start to evaluate the regression models to be used in our platform. It's an initial study. There is a lot of work to be done regarding this regression model, but we could realize, just consider the best model. We checked some regression models to predict the outputs, the final number of action, the initial number of action, and the planning time that was spent in the beginning or in the whole simulation. Then we could evaluate the models using a precision metric, the R2 metric, and we could achieve high levels of precision here, over 80%. And we also checked the dispersion of this model with this root mean square errors metric that just checks the distribution, the dispersion of the points that the prediction errors. But in this case, we just evaluate the best models, but we need also to check the overview of the models in all the experiments. Then when we did that, we could see that about the initial plan length, the number of the first plan, we could predict in a very good precision level here, over 90%. In all the experiments, all the clusters, but according the final plan length, we had interesting values here for cluster 2, but we had not so good values here in cluster 3. And according to the planning time, we had the same behavior. We have interesting values here and here in some clusters, some outliers, but we had poor values here. So we need to, as I said in the beginning, it's an initial study, and we need to perform a further investigation with this regression model. But the reason that we are talking about regression model, It's because the requirements, the evolution that we need to perform to answer the second and the third research question. About the second research question, the action removal, I believe that the evaluation that need to be performed would be easier than the third one, because somehow it just needed to update the failure simulation here. Action removal can be understood as a bigger case than state perturbation, when all the action effects is removed or deleted, is undone. But when we are talking about the third research question about agent removal, and that's the reason that we start to study about regression model. What happens when an agent is removed? The impact is bigger than just an action removal, because when we remove an agent, the set of available actions is changed, so the planning process is affected. Other agents' plan are affected too, because they may depend on other agent execution. The relationship between agents, it's updated too, because, for example, and we have just one action that builds the bridge between two different actions, and that's the action that builds the coupling level among agents. And when we remove this agent and we remove this action, we can change the problem from cluster 3 with a tightly coupled domain to the first cluster level, and with a high number of private actions. And we are thinking to use this regression model to provide a condition to check the performance of the evaluation strategy at runtime. For example, as I said in the related work, most work use replan and repair strategies. But we think that during runtime, there are some times that, according to configuration of the environment, replan can be better than replan. But according to another condition of the environment, the condition may change. So replan can be better. So you need to decide during the runtime to decide, okay, now in this condition, which is the best recovery strategy to be performed. So that's the reason that we decide to study this this regression model. So, final remarks, the current contributions of our work, we build a simulation, a planning simulation platform, putting together planning tools, PDDL for Java and Repass Symfony tool. It's flexible enough to receive different planning problems. We draw some partial conclusions about the first research question about the performance in a dynamic environments affected only by state perturbation. We used a clusterization of problems that we never saw in other works, just to define the similarity among the case studies. And our to-do list, we need to simulate the second and the third research question failures, the action and the agent remove. We intend to study the impact of failure probability in our simulation output, and we need to define this regression model, the set of regression models to use in our simulations. I have more or less 18 months until the final of my work that will need to be defended on the end of next year. So I have more or less 18 months to do so. And in these 2 years of work, we had published a work in the Congress on Evolutionary Computation in 1918. We had a paper that was accepted last year, but it was not published because it had a delay on the notification, and I couldn't receive the financial support just because this delay. I was approved, but I couldn't show the notification that I was accepted. So I didn't join the conference, and the work that was accepted was not published. Then we decided to take this work, and we improved the work, and we submitted to Knowledge and Information System we had our first notification that was accepted. Then we need to perform some reviews, and we sent again on February, and we are waiting for the final notification. So that was I intended to present. I think that I respect the time that Professor Celia said. It was a lot of training to do so, but I prepared a demonstration if the professors want to see a little demonstration of the simulation and how it happens. I'm ready to show or to start to answer the questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation. Would you like to see the demonstration? It takes only 2 minutes. Is that right?
So your voice is kind of dumbling. I don't know how to say.
Sorry.
It's
okay. Better now, Leliane?
Yeah, it's better now.
Thanks for telling me. Is that right if he demonstrates the tool? Is it interesting for you to see?
For me, yes.
Okay.
For me, yes, as well.
Yes. Okay.
May I? Well, I will share a new screen here about the video. So it's a Eclipse plugin. Then when we start the simulation, define the simulation that need to be started, and it opens the simulation tool. We need to define the parameters of the simulation, the planning problem that we want to simulate. Here it's I define a set of configurations in this experiment file. Then I need to define from this set which configurations I want to simulate here in the experiment number, and the failure probability and the recovery strategy. So I define the parameters. Then I start the simulation, build the environment. I can put here some delay just to make to see how the things happen. So we see the planning time, the failure happening here. And when the simulation ends, during the simulation, I had probably a logging capability. So here is just the input that I use. So all the phases of the simulation is logged here in this file. So the agents are receiving the plan, and the execution it starts. One failure happened, and when an agent realized that failure, just a little bit. So the process of the simulation here in a text way. So when an agent realizes that there is a failure and it cannot perform an action, he sends a message for help to the coordinator. Then the coordinator starts the repair process and send new plans to agents. So it's just what I intend to show. Come back here. Okay. Just to make things easier to understand, it's the first part of the simulation at the beginning. Then here, I don't know if you all can, it's easy to see, but in the problem part, in the beginning of the simulation, we see the simulation input and all the preparation of the simulation here when the problem is encoded. After, when the solution is found and the coordinator starts to send the planning and the problem to the agent, so we see here that agents receiving the problem and the plan. And during the loop of simulation, actions are performed, and there is a moment when a failure is detected, and an agent needs to ask for help for for the coordinator, and a new plan is performed. And in the beginning, when our problem is solved, the simulation just ends. And during the simulation, when agents there are no more actions to be performed, just send a message to the coordinator just to say that, okay, I have no more actions to perform. I'm just waiting for the end of the simulation. So that was the demonstration that I prepared, just to make things clear if I was not so clear during the presentation.
Okay, Leonardo, thank you very much for your demonstration part 2. So to proceed with our examination, now we should let Antonin Komenda, professor, talks and evaluate, give suggestions and make questions for for Leonardo, our candidate. Okay, Antonin, we start by the fairest examiner, and in this case, I have no doubt that is you. You can ask questions if you would like, and make suggestions, and please be free.
Okay, so first of all, I would like to ask what do you mean by coordination? So is that just running of the plans of the particular agents and like waiting for effects of
Thank you for the question. And as I talk about the coordination, the coordinator agent receives the planning problem, builds a sequence of action, a solution. But this solution is a multi-agent planning, and we have different agents that are the executors, and this coordinator turns this multi-agent planning into single agent planning, into different sequence of action that can be performed by a specific agent, then sends these plans to the agents. Then agents start the execution part. The coordination that it's performed, it's based on when agents realize that is a failure, and then all the planning process is performed on a centralized approach by the coordinator, and then agent send a message to the coordinator to ask for help. Then, as there was a failure in the environment, so the execution may not be available or right anymore, then the coordinator checks all the plans again, and if it's necessary, he updates the agent's plan to perform a new sequence of action that can be performed, the conditions to achieve the goal state of the planning problem.
Okay, I understand. So my question was that, okay, so if I get it right, when you look at one plan of one agent, you can have like no operation actions there. So these no operation defines like absolute ticking sign in the world.
Sorry?
So are there like no operations in the plan? Or yes. Okay, so yes. Different question. So you assume that there is absolute time in the whole system, because okay, so there are technically two ways how you can coordinate the agents who are executing multi-agent plans. One is that you assume that all the agents have the same wall clock time, and you just get the plans and you have spaces or no operation actions in the plan, and you just assume that like all the clocks of all the agents are ticking the same way. The yes. other way how to coordinate the agents is that the agents are sensing the environment, and if preconditions of their actions, which they cannot do at that time, are valid, which means that some other agent caused them, they can proceed with the action. The trick is that if you are doing the second thing, it's not so easy to detect whether you are in a failure state, because you do not know whether you are waiting for something not happening because of a failure or because of another agent didn't do it yet. So that's why I was asking, because you can solve it by this assumption of absolute time ticking, or you can do some more intrigue coordination algorithms like that. At every waiting for preconditions of an action, the agents have to communicate and ask the other action. So the other agents, are you fine with it? Did you all do all the actions you have in your plans? And if every agent tells you, yes, we did, but you still cannot execute the actions, you know that there is some kind of failure. So that was, I was asking what
I understand.
Process or what principle you used for the coordination and detection of the failures.
When the coordinator turns the multi-agent planning into single agent planning, he may input some idle state, some empty actions, and an agent just wait. And I use this assumption that we have simulation steps. So simulation parts that the agent perform the actions that need to be performed in that step of the simulation. And after each simulation, the agent send a message to the controller, say, "Oh, I did my work, my action step in that step of the simulation." The next step of the simulation just starts when all the agents finished that current simulation step. In some case, the agent 1 can be the first one to be simulated, or the second one. But this coordination is performed by the simulation. A second, the next simulation step only starts when all the executions, all the actions in that simulation step were performed. And during this step of simulation, a failure may happen. So in the current state of my work, as I'm just simulating this failure, the state perturbation, after an action is performed, the simulation layer checks, perform a failure using a uniform distribution, just to, okay, I will cause some failure now or not. But just in the end of each step in the simulation. Then the simulation will only be realized in the next step. So we have a period of the simulation when we control that all the agents need to perform the specific action in this time, in this period of simulation.
Okay, thank you. I get it. So I was asking, there was a reason why I was asking, and the reason is when I was working on this, there were no distributed multi-agent planners. And that was the biggest pain we had. So I had to implement or re-implement one of the planners. That was the planner from Rasnissim from Israel, from Technion. But this planner didn't run distributively. But today, there are implementations of planners from our group, from Alejandro Torreño's group, from Israel group, from Carmel Domschlag's group, with distributed implementation of the planners. So what you could do is that you could run really physically distributively the planner. So you could have 3 computers representing, I don't know, robots, agents, whatever. And you could run the planner distributively. And you can repair then parts of the plans using this distributive running of the planner, which I think would be interesting, because then you can really think about deployment on some robotic systems or some distributed, I don't know, assembly lines in factories or something like that. So, of course, you can solve it by central point, like this controlling agent, which is the central point which detects the failures and then orchestrates the agents and the plan repair or replanning process. But I think it would be interesting, at least look at state of the art or publications in this direction, because doing this fully distributively, that at least in my opinion, it would make like a lot of sense. And I think the technology today is like ready for it. So that's just a suggestion.
Yes, it's possible. Our simulation platform, the Repass Symphony, provides condition to run all the simulation in a distributed approach in more than just one machine, as you said, and it's possible. We thought about the centralized approach at the beginning, just to start the process. Of course, there are works to do, contributions that can be performed, and our suggestions are always welcome, and we need to just to check about the time that I have to finish the work. I don't know if I
totally get it. That's why I said it's just suggestion, because so first thing is, you don't need to distribute the simulation. It's totally fine if your simulation is centralized, but the agents are distributed. So then you are saying, okay, so the world, like the real world, is technically centralized because you just like touch it by the sensors and effectors from like different robots or different agents. But the trick is that the agents should run distributively, because then you can say, okay, they can move, they can be on some mobile platforms or something like that. But obviously, if you even can distribute it in the simulation, that helps a lot. So then you can do the simulations using like distributed running of the planners and of the coordination mechanism. Okay, so that was this. And I have only another question, and that's about the repairing techniques. So you extended the work by the assumption that you can lose an agent, which I think is good. I think what's also interesting in this direction is not only look at losing an agent or perturbing the state or losing an action, but looking into some like more intrigue changes in the environment which you could analyze, let's say, and then use it in the plan repair, let's say, with more efficiency or focus. So example, when you assume that you are losing an action or an agent, the information is quite, or how to say it? It's not giving you any information how efficiently do the repair. But so that's why if the only information you know is that the world can change, which is the perturbations, your possibilities how to replan or fix the plan is quite limited, because you have to assume the worst which can happen. So I was always imagining it like this. So by saying that the state can be perturbed, that means that all the agents have to think about possible changes in the world, like that the trucks in logistics are teleported, or that I don't know, in taxis the drivers are switching like between the cars and stuff like that, which doesn't happen in real world. And that's exactly why I work with the concept of like distance of the change. So I was looking how probable is some change in the world. So something radical, like exactly teleporting something in the world, is not much probable. But just moving a car between 2 points, it's more probable, because you can have some noise in your sensors, or you can have like bad information from the agents or something like that. So it makes more sense that you are looking at these conservative changes. Do you have some concept of these conservative changes, or something which can help the replanning algorithms? Or you are just trying to do the most broad case of failures, and you are just working with this assumption that like whatever can fail, it will fail?
No, I was talking to Professor Seller, my supervisor, about this question. What kind of perturbation can happen in our simulation? And that was one question, that one problem that I need to overcome. And that time when I sent you an email, to the first email, to ask, okay, I read a lot of times your work. That was my base work to guide my research. Then when I first the first code to simulate the first part of the simulation, then I had this problem. The things may change to places like this. It was a big problem that in a step of simulation, a robot was in one location, and another step it was in another part of the world. It's completely impossible to happen. Then I decided to simulate this state perturbation in a conservative way, as you said in the email. Then the only thing that was changing or undoing, it's some effects of that action. For example, in an action, there are 3 different effects that it's caused after the execution. I randomly choose 1 or 2 or 3, the number it's chosen in a random way. Then I just undo that effect. So somehow I am not affected by this kind of teletransportation problem. We draw that research questions in that order. The first one, the environment state with these conditions, and after the action removal, because we believe that the action removal can be understood as a generic way to see the environmental perturbation, because when we remove an action, we believe that's the same thing that we remove all the effects of that action. So we are doing like a pipeline of complexity in our simulation. And in the end of the work, the action, the agent removal, that, as you said, it's very interesting to understand. There is a lot of points to investigate in this area. When we remove an agent, it's the same thing that we remove all the possible actions of that agent. But in our work, we had this kind of problem to control the failure somehow, to limit how the failures need to happen, to guarantee that the simulation will end. That's the one reason that I sent that email, because I realized that was some simulations in a loosely approach, when everything can happen, that the simulation never ends, or just reaches a condition when there is no solution. Then I need to use that timeout, and to guarantee that the simulations, the failures was not so, I don't know, destroyed so much the environment to reach a condition when there's no solution. So we were worried about this problem too, and I know that there are a lot of problems that I need to face too, and I will understand, but I will just suffer during the pain, as you said. There's a lot of pain and a lot of scares to suffer until the end of the work.
Yeah, I get it. So so that was my 2 questions. Thank you very much for the answers.
So, as I could catch up your suggestions, Antonin, you suggested to look for the state-of-the-art of distributed way to solve problems in multi-agent planning.
Yeah, so for example, from our group, the MA planner, I don't know if you found it, that one can run distributively, but I'm just like remembering that one because it's from our group, but I am pretty sure that there are other planners which can run distributively as well from different groups. So I would look at them.
Yeah, and you don't think that using simulation as we are doing is a problem?
No, that's totally fine. You need a simulation when you, well, okay, so in classical planning, like in the community of ICAPS, we usually don't do execution, which is somehow like pity, I would say, because we just take the inputs and we get the output, but no one executes the plans. And doing execution and repair or some techniques which solve problems during the execution, that's, in my opinion, under research area like a lot. So always it's good when someone takes the plans and tries to execute them. So I'm pretty sure that the simulation is good step and good direction for the research.
Okay, and you suggested also to use a concept like a distance of change to see how distant is the objective to be reached. So we could.
Yeah. So in general, in the literature on plan repair, what you can find is that in general, like formally, there is a proof that replanning is always better in the sense that it solves the problem efficiently in comparison to plan repair. But the problem is that all these assumptions or all these like results assume that you have no additional information about the failures. But if you have such information, exactly like the distance, like the size of the perturbation or the concept of the local failures or something like that. So that's why I was like pointing you that maybe looking into this problem, like defining something more about the failures, can help the plan repair a lot in comparison to replanning. And that's why the whole thing of replanning makes much more sense, because then you can say, okay, so I know that in this particular problem, I can see that the failures are happening like this and like this and like this. So maybe cluster the failures or like define some metrics on the failures or some distances of like the perturbations or something like that. And then you could even like compute and formally prove that with this type of failures, plan repair will be always better by this margin or with this planner or something like that. And then, in my opinion, would be really nice result of the thesis, because you would have another like tool for people who are then using these techniques like to solve their problems, and they could look at their problems and say, okay, so I have this kind of problem, it has these properties, and that's why this kind of plan repair will work better or will work like this and this, this and this better.
Well, thank you very much for your suggestion.
You're welcome.
Let's pass to the next examiner. It's Professor Leliane, please. You are with your time of questioning and suggestions. Thank you very much for enjoying the board.
Okay.
We can hear you and
okay.
we can see you too.
Okay. So thank you so much for the invitation to be part of this committee. So I was in the defense committee of Leonardo, right?
Yes.
It was a long time ago. I don't remember.
2 years ago.
Very much. Very well. But I remember you, of course. And I at that time, I knew you're like a beginner in the planning area. We talk about some concepts, main concepts in planning. And I see that you improved a lot. Now you know a lot about planning, so it's nice to see. So my main concern here is about the formalization and that you gave for the section of problem characterization. Huh? That's the way you call it. Okay, let's start here. Oh, even the introduction, I think I like it better, your presentation, than the section. The introduction section was not clear. Many things were not clear for me, and I must say that I'm not an expert in multi-agent planning, but in single-agent planning. So I work only with single-agent planning. So I don't know about this multi-agent planners, like you're just talking about. I don't know much about that, but the formalization should be understandable, no? And so that's my problem with the way you describe it, the problem, the map, how they call multi-agent planning problem. No? Well, first of all, what do you call dynamic environment? It should be the well defined, because we're talking about dynamic environment anyway. But I think you're talking about an environment when you have an exogenous action, so some unexpected action happening, event happening. Yeah. So this is not usually the way we call a dynamic domain. No? It is a dynamic for nature, because when you talk about planning, you talk about dynamic environment, but it has these exogenous events, okay, that you have to take care. And this is the main cause of failure for you, right?
Yes.
Okay, so we should define that. I made some notes here. When you talk about assumptions, also about assumptions of the actions, you talk about some alternative things like deterministic, non-deterministic, probabilistic, but hierarchical and temporal are not alternative; they are complementary. So you should be careful with that. Okay. And really make sure that you're talking about deterministic actions, that you never really make clear that this is an assumption that you make at some point, but in the introduction you don't say when you want to understand the problem. You're not clear about that. You only show that it's deterministic in your examples or in your description of the action, but you don't state that this is the problem. All actions are deterministic. Also, you talk about cost, but you never really mention in the introduction that you are trying to minimize cost. It's unit cost, the problem that you really considering. So the shortest plan is your solution, but when you have not unit into cost, you must do something else to solve the problem. Okay. Okay. So your research questions, I think the first one and the third one are very much related, and it should be stated in a different way, because you're really concerned about finding the best way to recover a plan, a failure, a fault plan, right? So, and then you put a research question, the third one, that is when you consider removing an agent. What is it should be in the same question, I think. The first one and the third. It's confusing, this. And talking about removing an agent, I'm a little bit concerned about that, because when you define the problem, each agent has a goal. So if you're removing an agent, you're just not reaching that agent goal, right? So your solution is not complete. It's not correct, let's say. What to do with this? What do you do with this?
About this agent part, the last part that you said, I'm considering cooperative and public goals. So all agents work to find a solution for a common set of goals. Then I believe when an agent is removed from the environment, some capabilities that need to be performed to achieve that goal condition maybe not available anymore, and that's what I want to study. I want to simulate to see what can we do now when an action that was needed to be performed, was planned to be performed by a certain agent, and this agent is not available anymore. Which agent will
okay. So this is a perturbation. This is a type of perturbation, right? It's not clear also in the introduction. I'm misleading. Now I understand what you're saying. I thought it was like if you want to recover a plan, one solution could be removing an agent, so that's ridiculous. That's what I thought when I make this note. And you're right. This is the way, but you don't write well this in the introduction. This is a kind of a perturbation. Remove an agent.
I think, Leliane, everything happens. You're misunderstood because of the lack of definition of what is dynamic environment.
Right.
And when you see what we consider dynamic environment for the state perturbation is something exogenous, as you said, and that's not defined. So it's completely different to have something exogenous happening from the environment, from removing an agent that's involved with the plan. That I think that is the bigger mistake here in the document, not clarifying this. And that's why you understood it different from us. That's the problem. So that's why I think question 1 and 3 are completely different.
Because, for instance, if you remove, I thought about that. If you remove an agent, when you have a fault, a failure. So now, if you want to repair that, one way, not repair the plan, but recover the plan, you just remove an agent, because maybe the action of the specific action of that agent is failing.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yes.
It's failing, no? So you find another way to achieve the same goal. But okay, I understand that it is a kind of perturbation that you introducing, right?
We try to organize the research questions in a complexity scale. First, the perturbation, it's something that may happen just about the environment itself, but not according agents itself. As I said before, we can simulate one failure in effects of an action. That's what we consider a state perturbation. Then in the second step, we consider to simulate all the failure in all the effects of an action. That's an action removal, as we consider an action removal. And when we remove all the actions of one agent, we are talking about the agent removal. That's the order.
Okay. Yeah, it's like the agent is the robot is broken, so you must achieve your mission, your goal without that broken robot. It makes sense. Yeah. Also I'm following the introduction, because the introduction is really important, right? You should put here the goals of your thesis, and it's not clear. So when you wrote down these 3 questions, research questions, after that you describe other things that you did, like the platform, the simulation platform, and other things that you did, like the tests, like using regression, machine learning to analyze the methods. All the things are, let's say, goals of your PhD. And you don't, like you say, you don't destacar, como é que fala?
Highlight.
Highlight.
You don't highlight that in the introduction. So yeah. It's nice to write like you did, put the research questions that you're trying to answer in your PhD, but it's also nice to list all the contributions your work is supposed to give. So you don't do, you just talk en passant, like you just talk about platform and then my regression method. The regression method
must be clear.
Yeah, it's not clear. It's not really highlighted as contributions of this PhD.
I'll improve it.
Things like that. Yeah.
This part can be sure.
Also, in a general way, the introduction is so important. You should have these problems as an example. You know, I know you talk about a real world problem like the military offensive operation. You should use that example to illustrate your setup. Use what you're talking about, a motivation problem. So you don't use the artificial problems like satellites or Xenova of the planning community. You could use one of them, or I think always, if you have a real world example, it's much more nice, much more impressive as an example to illustrate what you're doing here. So you don't have that in the introduction. You should have when you use that in the second session, model characterization. It's very simple, and of course, when you want to formalize, it should be that a very trivial problem, even an abstract problem. But in the introduction, you should mention a more motivating problem to understand what you're talking about.
As you said in the introduction, I talked about the military problem. That's because
I know.
I'm from Brazilian Army. It's interesting.
But that's nice because you're an expert, so you should.
That was an example because when I was talking to my supervisor, we believe that in a military operation we can describe all the failure that we are studying in our work. The first one, the state perturbation, because, for example, we are in a battlefield, in a war, and we plan to do something, but the enemy also plan to, and makes other things that we are expecting a condition, but he changed the environment. So it's the first one. And then the second, an action is removed. We have the conditions. We intend to perform an action, for example, to fire or whatever, to move from one place to another, but the roads may be broken, or we have a problem in our car, in our tires, something. So it's the second one. And the third one about the agent removal, it's terrible to say, but soldiers may die in the battlefield, so agents can be removed. Okay.
Right.
But when I was talking about this problem, I thought it would be difficult to describe all the concepts of military operation.
Yeah.
Then I just try to make an overview, just an example, and of course the real world problem somehow can be this military operation, but I need to find a way to describe all this concept, because for me it's very easy to understand, because I'm a soldier, but I think it's not so easy for people that
to model a new planning problem, it's always very difficult.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a knowledge engineering process, which is not easy. But there are many other problems that are artificial, but only toy problems that you could use here to illustrate.
Yes,
No problem. There is one that my student used in non-deterministic planning with one single agent, but you should modify. You could modify that. Is the fire? I don't remember the name of. It's like a search and rescue in a situation of fire and disasters. So it's a nice problem for multi-agent.
Okay. Maybe it's easier to understand than a full military war.
And actually, if you get one very the most complex problem for multi-agent system planning that you really understand, inspired on that, you try to model military applications.
Okay.
It's an easy way to do. Just you see that it's the same structure. You just change the semantic of the operators. You might find something like that easier, but it's always a very
to build a military operation. Use the concepts of the common case studies.
Yeah.
Which is Leliane, sorry, which student of yours have worked with this, a PhD?
Viviane.
Viviane. Okay. I know.
Her thesis, I think she explained details.
The one that's working in PLE state, right?
Say again? She worked with model checking, symbolic model checking.
Yes, model checking. Okay.
For planning.
Okay.
Okay. So, what else I wanted to say here? I also had problems to understand what is the coordination model or the coordinator agent. So in your multi-agent system, you have only one agent that plans, the reason about.
Yes.
And the others are only executors.
Yes.
I think it's so restricted, so constrained, because then you're just talking about agents. One agent that it's a single agent planner thinking about the other agents that only execute the actions as a resource. Like for instance, I say that kind of work with single agent for the same problem that you were talking about, the truck and the plane, the logistic problem. And the plane and the truck, for me, it's a resource.
Yes.
It's not an agent. Because he's not capable of reason about the actions. So that's the question for it. It's a genuine, it's a real multi-agent planning you're talking about, or it's a single agent planning problem?
In this first approach, we are using this centralized approach, but it's possible to give planning abilities to agent too. But I'm trying to build a sequence of actions before talking about distributed planning, as the professor Komenda said.
You distribute the execution, not the planning.
Okay, but when in the second part, to give abilities, reason abilities, planning abilities to agent, I think I need to solve all the first part of the problem as a single agent planning, as you said, just as a preparation of the second part.
Okay, so what this coordinator, this agent, the intelligent agent, the planning agent is doing, not considering really that the executors, the execution, the simultaneous execution of the other agents' actions have an expected effect because they depend on each other. So the coordinator don't consider interaction between them. So we just consider single agents and no interaction between. There is no interaction between the isolated plans, right?
The biggest part of the coordination is performed during the execution. I don't know if it's the main.
But it generates offline and offline
Yes.
plan.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Generate offlines, then send the plans to the agent.
But then these plans are going to be executed simultaneously. So in step 1, if you have 3 agents, they are going to do in the same time their actions.
Yes.
So this is a problem that we talk in planning and reasoning about actions, that you don't know the effect. You know the effect of one action, but you don't know the effect of the 3 actions simultaneous.
But when I make that part, that the coordinator turns the multi-agent plan into single agent plan, he checks the possibility of, for example, the 3 actions. They can be performed in that step of simulation.
Okay, so
the coordination arranges the sequence of action to send agents the correct order of plans.
Okay, so in your formulation, when you talk about you miss here in the formulation, the formal description, what is the state resulting from the execution of simultaneous actions? You just described here this function of a state transition, gamma, for a single agent. And then when you try to describe for a multi-agent, you don't talk about how to compute the next state.
Okay.
So you totally miss that, because like in the definition 7, you describe the math task, and you talk about a set of propositions that it is the union of all propositions of each agent, right?
Yes.
But you never talk about, well, first of all, since for the single agent, you make one important assumption, the closed word assumption. You know what is this? We talked about it last time. What is the closed word assumption? Do you remember, Leonardo?
The closed word assumption is that the only thing that happens in the environment is caused by the action of agents.
No.
No?
No, the closed word assumptions is about knowledge representation, the state representation. You talk about only, like you formalized here, your state is described with a subset of the propositions. And that means anything that's not there is false, not true. So when you do that, you do this closed word assumption, the single agent, but when you talk about multi-agent, and if you have some common proposition between them, you know, they, like for instance, the same proposition of there is, in your example, you have one. It is the is the all package, add package.
I'm trying to follow him in the document.
Add package in the listing 1, the description of your example operators.
Okay.
This is a predicate in this case. After you instantiate, is going to be the proposition, and the proposition is a common proposition. It's common among the two, between the two, in this case, agents, plane and truck, right? It is a common one. So when an action of one agent modifies this proposition, and the other agent also modifies this proposition, there must be a different way to compute the next state. It's not completely independent. So you don't talk about how to compute the next state. How the coordinator plans for multi-agent in this case. So it's not formalized here. So you don't describe correctly how is gamma for multi-agent.
Okay, but it depends on the execution part. It's not only about the coordination.
But the offline planner.
No. Yes.
But think about all these interactions. Okay, but you don't describe formally here. You don't, at least you don't put here an expression, the two formula. The formula, the equation here, number 2, is described only for one agent.
Yeah.
Well, another thing in this introduction, in this formalization, is that you don't really make clear when you talk about a single or a multi-agent. Many definitions here, I don't know if you're really talking about, you mix up. First, like here, and then the definition 7 is for multi-agent. But then the equation 1 is for one agent. Equation 2 is for single agent again. So this formalization is
okay.
Okay.
I need to use just the single agent just to start the explanation, but then I need to worry about multi-agent formulation.
Yeah, in your thesis you should separate both and define every single concept
for single and for multiple agents. Okay. I think that part that we are talking about the execution. I know that maybe it's not clear in the document, but I need to work on this part during the execution, when as I said in the beginning, when in each simulation step, when an agent performs that action, this kind of an action changes this effect, and another action changes that effect. This coordination is performed in the simulation layer, when that action component updates the environment according to the execution or action executions. But it's not in the background. You are completely right. I need to improve this part to prepare the understanding to the rest of the document.
There is a fundamental problem in reasoning about action when you talk like one agent is carrying a long table from one side, and I would say lift. Oh, I don't know the word. Levanta, como é que é?
Lift.
Levanta. Lift one extreme of a table, and nothing happened. You cannot
joint actions
like that. And if you have a joint action, you have a different effect. If you move the table with two agents, one in each extreme,
and
the result is completely different. So if you're talking about simultaneous actions, you must have a model here, formalization for that.
Yes.
Another thing here is that I didn't understand, sorry, then, but this must be from the literature of multi-agents. Definition 11. What is delta? One thing that you have to improve in your discrete formalization is that you put an equation, a formula in your text. You must explain right after, no? You must explore right before what are the notation you're using. So I don't know what is delta here, and I couldn't understand this definition 11.
Definition is 11. It's the intersection of preconditions and effects of each action.
What is delta? Define what is delta.
Here, in the end, the union of the set conditions, and delta star is the union of effects, the second and the third.
Okay, that was I see. Good. Oh my God, I didn't understand.
And when we have the intersection of the unions, and we have an empty set, we are talking about private actions. It's another way to see private and public actions.
Okay. I didn't understand, but now I could read right. So it's a union of, but you should write down, you cannot expect this. I have to be more smarter, or no, but you cannot expect the reader understand a figure without explanation, and or understand a formula without explanation. You should explain.
Professor Celia always says that I'm too direct to write things. I just put one line, then I need to understand one whole page of text with one line. Then it's my problem.
Mnemonics.
Okay, minimalist. Okay, and then also then we go to the example, and I'm finishing here. Okay, then you have. Now I understand better the example of the preconditions. And okay, there is an intersection, your example. Okay. So if you're talking about, well, if this example, very simple example, goes to a longer introduction in your thesis, you could use that. And then after that, to give an example of how to recover a plan. What is a plan for this problem? I should explore this example. It's a small one, and I think you should use that in your final introduction.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you a few more questions, and then I'm done. I'm sorry taking so long. So my English is not very good. We write technically in English and we just survive on that, but your English must be improved. So when you write a paper or you write the final thesis, you should be more careful with your English because it is hard to understand the writing things. The things that were wrote. You speak well, your presentation were okay, but you should improve that. Ask someone to read or to correct for you at the end. Okay, so you also in the introduction don't discuss what a very important thing, a core thing. What is the difference between replan and repair? And also when you talk about replan, you never add that you want to replan from the current state. Start considering the initial stage, the current stage. This is important, but in many places you don't write down this. You don't want to replan completely from the initial state. All the agents go for the initial state again. So use replan from the current stage. You should say that and formalize also what it is. Replan and repair. I studied I'm the old-fashioned planning person on research. So the work of repair, I had a student doing a master's degree in repair of, I forgot the name now. Very famous researcher now, an Indian guy. I forgot the name. His name. So I know kind of well what it is repair of a single plan. So you should describe. You can describe that formally also, because this is a main goal of your thesis. So, yeah, you should define this. What it is repair. What is plan? Actually, you never define what it is. What is planning? That's all my doubts, because I don't know much about multi-agent planning. You don't define planning.
The sequence of actions.
No, in the introduction, you don't say that what it is, what you want to optimize, or what kind of solutions you have in the literature for multi-agent planning. You don't talk about that in the introduction. Everything from the introduction is supposed to at least define what it is planning for multi-agent. It's not there. It's not there.
Okay.
Okay, and this idea of online, offline, it's mixing in multi-agent planning. It's interesting because the coordinator do an offline planning first, and then afterwards you're talking about an online planning. When you do repairing, you monitoring, and you and that's right. It's very rare in the planning community to concern about execution. And you do here because you are originally from the multi-agent area, and this is important, and it's nice. I work with now I work with probabilistic planning, and we talk about using simulator and do an online planning. I do that. I do mix now planning with the learning, and we talk about having a simulator and do online planning. I do that.
Yeah.
Okay. And so let me, one more thing. The idea of a coordinator do the planning and the other agents do the execution is not accommodated, explained by the figure 1. Okay? You should redo this figure for this architecture of a multi-agent system.
The figure 1.
Figure 1. Yeah,
it's not the way to use it. You see the agent, there is one agent, other agents.
Okay. The point is
one agent do planning, the other agents also do planning. That's not right. You're not doing that. So this
I try to use this picture to build a bridge between multi-agent system and multi-agent system and planning and multi-agent planning. But in the whole picture, when you consider the work and our model, the coordinator agent is not described in that picture.
Yeah, this would be very elucidative, like easy for us to understand what you're talking about. This figure is misleading.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So I like it, your proposal. I think it's very nice. You're gonna have a lot of work. I know that is. I see that is a project that you can say that is a very good project for a PhD. So good luck. And congratulations for you and your advisor. I think it's a very challenging problem.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Leliane. I appreciate your comments. All the mistake and we passed by this formalization part. You were right. About everything you said. we mixed, I think, the formalization of a single agent planning with a multi-agent planning. It's not clear here, but I know why this happened. We got the Galab formalization for a single agent, and then we mixed it with the Woodbridge multi-agent. It's not planning multi-agent, but it's acting as multi-agent, and we put it together. And it's mixing, and it's complicated to understand because it's missing a lot of things. As you said, it's missing the interleaved predicates here when they are executing and the planning when it's done offline too. So we must take care of that formalization and improve it in a better way for representing the problem and the model. It's mistaken. I recognize. I excuse for that. I'm sorry, but it's really wrong. And I took notes, and we are going to take a close look of all your suggestions. All right? Thank you very much for your experience in reading and detailing how the introduction is mixing a lot of it's missing a lot of concepts and a lot of ideas. But I think you recognize the problem, as you said, as a challenge problem of working with this distributed environment, as it's only doing centralized at the moment. But it's a big problem to do it distributed with planning and acting together. And I think that's the motivation for his PhD, although we haven't reached that yet. But thank you very much. Let's pass to our internal examiner, Professor Genaina, to her comments and suggestions. Thank you very much for being here. Genaina, I know you are very busy at this time at the program coordination.
As well.
But your idea of dynamic software and dependability expertise is very important for us at the moment. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much, Celia, for the invitation. Thank you very much, Leonardo, for the very nice work. I have to confess that this last week has been quite tough for me. I explained that to Celia recently. As a relative of mine passed away, and other relatives were coming by, and not to mention all the funeral stuff. And I'm also hosting my parents and my sister's family, so things around have been quite hard to deal with. But as far as I could go through the work, I pretty enjoyed it. I think that's a very nice work. I think the topic, I think we chose a very nice topic. It's very up to date. I'll say the problem that you were facing here. There are a lot of opportunities for you to explore here. I think maybe you could, I don't know, a suggestion, maybe try to delineate a smaller context for the problem, because I think there are a lot of things here for you to do. But of course, I mean, this is part of all the let's say this vibe, right? So to give suggestions, to give ideas on how you can try to have a first of all, try to have like a smaller context for you to tackle the problem, and then you can go further to other problems and then go step by step on that, right? So one of the things, for example, when you talk about the planning and recovering, this is one particular problem. But then when you go to the simulation itself, then I think there's another issue. And at some point I was a bit confused if the major contribution of a work was the planning strategy or it was the simulation itself, because it involves a lot of things here in my perspective, right? And then also, at least in my mind, there was some gaps here that was thinking of how, for example, do you represent the knowledge here? How do you represent the modeling part here? As you talked about goals here, and from a background, from the kind of research that I'm doing, I was trying to figure out how do you do the replanning with knowledge that you have available in the context, and how do you model that information so that the replanning, let's say, strategy could carry out all the actions that need to be performed. But then I said, no, this is a lot of things. So there are some assumptions here. Maybe if you make them clearer in the introduction, these kind of assumptions, then it will help you to avoid this kind of these kind of questions. So maybe making some considerations, some priority considerations of what is the starting point where you continue your work from. So then you can avoid further issues from, let's say, what is the background knowledge that you're using here to do the planning, right? Because I mean, this is the kind of things that you're doing, as Celia has followed somehow the work of Gabriel Rodrigues, the other PhD student that I'm supervising, and then it raises these kind of questions, right? So maybe it would be nice if you from the introduction and then you could carry on in the proposal itself, saying like, okay, so my assumption is that I start from here, and everything that it's let's say behind or the background work here, then I have these assumptions here, and then my focus is on this particular part, right? But okay, so apart from that, I had some questions that Leilani already raised, and Anthony as well. So basically, these definitions of replanning and the reconfiguration, or let's say repairing, these kind of things, they would help if you had that before, right? So I won't repeat them. I agree with the suggestions that the colleagues raised here. But my part here, I was wondering here, what kind of failure you're planning to deal with, right? Because it's kind of black box apparently here. And I see like it's more contextual dependent, the kind of failures that can happen in a particular scenario. So we have here, as far as I remember, 4 kinds of different domains or different scenarios that you have simulated here, but in each of them there are different kind of failures that can happen here, and therefore different kind of noises that can happen here, right? So as Celia also mentioned, these kind of failures, because there are different, let's say, when you classify a failure, there is a taxonomy that is kind of known in the seminal paper of Avicii et al., where they have this kind of what's the domain of the failure, what's the consequence of the failure, what is if the failure, for example, is consistent or is inconsistent, and what is it? There is a the domain, the consequence. Okay, the ability to detect a failure, right? So the ability to detect, and what's the 4th one I mentioned before? The main consequence, detectability, and oh gosh, I should have taken note of that. But anyway, so you can classify the failure based on this taxonomy, right? And it would be nice if you had this idea of how do you distribute these failures based on this taxonomy. Why? Because then you can say, well, there are some kind of uncertainties that I'm able to deal with, the kind of failures that I can deal with here, but there are others that I don't do it here because there are some repair that you cannot do, for example, depending on, for example, if you have a Byzantine failure, and you all know this, right? And there are other kinds of failure that are very difficult to, like, for example, there is a silent failure, or there's a kind of a failure that it's very hard to detect, right? So I think it's good to make clear some boundary to which extent that you are able to deal with them, right? Not that you have to, but I think it would be advisable, because then you don't give too much expectation for that, right? From the PhD thesis perspective, right? Since you have like a broad document in the paper, I know that you can give some just brief citations for that. But since you have the PhD, and then I think it's good for you to have like a good classification of what kind of failures that you are aiming to. And then since you're talking about your simulation, then what kind of noise that you simulate that you are able to replan or to recover, right? Because there are some kind of failures that they will have different impact on your strategy, right? And depending on this kind of impact, then there are some that you say, well, there's a silent failure. I cannot recover from that. But maybe a replan here would be a better way to do, because you realize at some point that something's going wrong, right? You don't know what, but say, okay, so since I don't know what, so let me try to do a replanning, and then maybe I can just based on replanning, then I can figure out what to do. So something like, okay, I don't know what's happening here in my computer, and just shut down the computer, and then once it reboots, then it comes back to life. Then I don't know what happened, but I just know it's fixed, right? But there are some kind of failures that you have to repair, right? So especially when you were talking about catastrophic failure, then you were in a very sensitive environment. then it's kind of mission critical, you have to repair it. There's no chance for you to spend some time on trying alternative things, unless these alternatives you have already thought before, right? So you already know this very well, right? So since you're military, then you know that you have to apply something that is deterministic in that kind of environment, right? So so there's a mission critical environment. Then there are things that are not alternative. They have to be done and have a time constraint. And Antonin he raised that before, and I think that would be very nice if you have this carefully specified, because this could be another contribution of your work, because depending on the domain, then your work would suit very well. So they're kind of venues that they like this kind of thing, that you have like some safety critical, some security sensitive information, and maybe you could extend that for this kind of domain. But if talking about let's say in a broader sense, if talking about failure, there are some people say, okay, we don't make any specific claim here what kind of failure, just say, okay, we can do this, and there is a kind of a proof of evidence that we are able to do this. And then you can extend for later work something more time constrained, something that is more specific that constraints, and so on and so forth. Just suggestions here I'm giving to you, just to make your to help you to delineate better the context. And also, I think this will have a consequence also in the evaluation that you have further on, because, for example, some of them apparently the regression model didn't have much effect. So I think this has to do with the causal effect, with the things that you're trying to let's say you have a particular failure, and what are the strategies that have to recover or to replan, but then some of them, they don't, let's say they don't do the expected effect. And maybe this is because there is a need of a better knowledge representation of the failure that you have here, and the strategies that have to recover the failure, and the replanning, if the planning will have some effect on that, right? So maybe if you have like, if you scrutinize better the what kind of domain you're looking at, what are the possibilities that you have to recover, and what kind of plans that you're able to do here, right? So maybe a more clear causal effect that you can establish between the dependent and the independent variables maybe will make your decision a bit more deterministic in terms of how much you may say like, okay, I cannot do anything here because there's no chance I will be able to help you. There are some environments that say, okay, I have a chance here. It's not the best one, but I can do something. Are you, let's say, do you want to buy this? And then said, okay, since you don't have anything, then okay, let's try this, right? So you can have like a different levels of achievability that you can give to the let's say to the agent. So let's say levels. I would say in a more interesting levels of happiness, of goal satisfaction, right? So I said, okay, are you happy with this? No, I'm not. But they say, okay, this other way is like, no, I cannot say I'm just enough with this. I have to do at a certain degree. And then I say, I have to do this at a certain degree. There's going to be, then this kind of, let's say, decision would be in more critical environments, especially in your environment, military environment, I mean, right? In a way, I think like this kind of classification will help you at least to make your setup, making your planning, or make your recovery strategies a bit more controllable, if I can say this, because you have the uncertainties in the environment, right? So you have non-determinism in the environment you have, but you can say, I have some options here that I can try, and I know based on some previous knowledge, the literature has lots of information on this, previous work has lots of information on this, and then you can reuse previous knowledge on this, just for you to don't spend effort on something that you know that maybe will have no effect at all, or others that say, okay, I know from previous work that this will have some effect here, and then you can provide best options, right? But still, I think that that there's a lot of potential here. I think you did a lot of nice work here as well. I think for a Vive, I think you went quite further away, as you provided some evaluation for this, which is quite impressive. But I think now, as especially Leilani suggested, maybe it's time now to pave the way of the background knowledge of the proposal itself that you have done here, and then you look back and then you start to make things a bit more smooth, that you can really go through in a more like clear way, more try to formalize more the let's say the options that you took here. But I was really impressed with the evaluation that you already did, and also the results that you already reached. Well done. I think there's a very let's say it's quite supportive when you have like previous result that your work has been peer reviewed, and you have others saying that that given like a white flag for what you've done is good. So, and also it's good that you've already submitted to a journal. This is usually people struggle to have this, even like in the last year of the PhD. It's very nice that have already submitted. So there are goods and bads here. It's not nice that you didn't have another conference, but it's very good that you and supervisor decided to go through a journal. Usually that's the kind of thing that we are, especially now in Brazil, we are trying to direct the efforts towards a journal publication. It's very good that you have decided this. And I think it was a very wise decision to take, right? So yeah, so I have 4 or 5 questions, but most of them, they go towards these questions here. So what kind of failure that you're planning to, what is the planning algorithm or the planning reasoning that you have behind? I saw that there was a BPM representation for that. I don't know how your community, probably your community enjoys that, but usually I like more like an algorithm way, because you can see more clearly the parameters, what you can see, like the methods, you can see a bit more fine-grained the steps for the algorithms behind the plan itself, and also the parts that are involved on that. Also, there are some things here that was a bit curious about what kind of noises that you simulated. I think the noises and the failures, they have very close relationship between them. So I think it would be interesting if you could make clear what kind of noise that you simulated, what kind of perturbation that you raise in this environment, because depending on the noise, well, I mean, this is something that it's challenging, I know, but because there is uncertainty involved here, right? So you cannot predict what kind of noise that you have, but at least you can know what kind of noises that you generate here in this environment, right? Because depending on the noise that you have here, which you could say, okay, these noises are could consider that they are the failures itself that I consider in this environment. But what are the, because then, for example, there are some noise that, for example, these are, for example, information that come from sensors, and then maybe a reconfiguration would help here. But there are kind of noise that requires behavior, let's say, reconfiguration, I would say, but it sounds weird, but it's kind of behavior adaptation. Yeah, reconfiguration and then behavior. So reconfiguration mostly when you tune the parameters. Behavior when you have to have like a new components or have a new connectors. You need you know, different ways to carry out the adaptation itself, right? So maybe there are things that for example, replanning, I think it would be nice if you could make this clear between the reconfiguration itself and the behavior itself, because reconfiguration, I think it's easier, somehow easier for you to tackle, but behavior is of course, it depends on the scenario, but it might be a bit more difficult for you to do it. So maybe based on this reconfiguration of behavior adaptation, maybe it would be better for you to say, okay, maybe for reconfiguration, it would be easier for me, for example, to do maybe a kind of recovery strategy. But if you do like behavior adaptation, maybe a replanning would be more adequate for this kind of environment, right? Because I mean, I know that there are pros and cons here, and based on these self-adaptive systems, or you can go beyond in the autonomous environment. There are some decisions that you need to take, but let's say depending on, of course, the options that you have available, and depending on the complexity that this adaptation will require, that your work will move towards this, right? So in a way, it's kind of what you did, but then now look back and restructure the information that you provide here in what you did, right? And then if you do this kind of classification, maybe it will help you to maybe say why the replanning worked better in this scenario, or why maybe although the recovery didn't go well in all the scenarios, but maybe depends on the issues that I've raised before. It's just a hint I'm giving here, but of course it requires further study on this, right? As for the evaluation itself, before going to the evaluation, I somehow agree with Leilani as for the research questions. I'm not sure if I'm not sure if research question 3 would be really a research question, or would it be a particular scenario? Let me just go through here again.
The third one is about agent removal.
Yes. Well, about removing an agent in dynamic map environment, how to choose the best recovery strategy. Because to me, I think this is a kind of, I may be wrong, but it gives me the idea that this is kind of a failure scenario. Because it's like, you remove an agent, what kind of agent you're talking about here? Is an agent that is in charge, so it's kind of in a centralized environment, or is it kind of loose coupled environment? What kind of environment you are doing this agent removal? Because I think this would have different effects. For example, if you're talking about the centralized environment, and this agent is like the one that is in charge of taking the decisions, then of course this would be a single point of failure. But in a different environment, have a loose coupling environment, then this should be different, because you have like in the peer-to-peer strategy, this should be dealt in a easier way somehow, right? But I think, I don't know, but I think to me, this is a kind of a scenario for research question 1, maybe. Or it could also be part of research question 2, because in a way, it requires it might require a new plan recovery strategy in some ways, but it may not, depending, for example, if it's a loose coupled in the peer-to-peer environment, and then, for example, if I have like another agent that does what I do, then it should not take much effect at some point, right? Because, for example, when the communication increases, there will probably be an impact on that, because then it needs some load balancing. But there are scenarios that it shouldn't make any difference, right? So in a way, I think that research question 3 looks to me more like a particular scenario or a particular setup that you could do for to answer RQ1 and RQ2. But it's just a thing that came to my mind. But if you want to speak a bit on that, feel free. But if not, it's just a suggestion, and it kind of it made this kind of let's say confusion in my mind.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to talk to you again. And let's see if I can answer everything. But I think the main point is what Professor Antonin Komenda said in the beginning, it's the concept of the distance of the perturbation, the failure. How far can we predict or realize that failure happened? As you said, the one point of that taxonomy, that to predict, to realize that thing happened. Then I explained the part of the how to control the failure. We have these three kind of failures when just a small perturbation in the environment, and the second one, the action removal, when all the effects of that action it's deleted, it's undone. Then, and in the last part, the agent removal. And when we remove an agent, we remove all the actions of that agent that exist in a plan. So, as I said before, it's like a pipeline, a complexity scale. Because I believe that when we are talking about agent removal, we are talking about action removal, and when we talk about action removal, we are talking about state perturbation. So the reason that I decided to put in this order the research question is because I think when I finish the first one, the environment, then I can just improve this simulation part to simulate the action removal. And then when I finish the action removal, I remove all the actions of one agent. Then it's the same thing that remove an agent in itself. That's why I did this particular order. According about what kind of failures I try to simulate in the experiments. I intend to simulate all the failures in all the clusters, all the scenarios. Until now, I did only the first one, the first research question, the state perturbation, but in all three clusters. Then in the second part, I will do the same thing, simulate the second type of failure, the action, in all three clusters, in all the configuration, and do the same thing in cluster 3, in the third research question, with all the clusters. And the question that you said, some failure may be easier to answer, to recover using this strategy or to use another strategy, and that I thought about that, and I'm worried about that, and that's the reason that I decided to use the regression model to try to evaluate during runtime, and that's. I'd like to thank you for that class in 1918. That was the root reason for that. It helped me a lot. I used that book, Jain, a lot.
Well done.
Well, that helped a lot. And but I think that the questions here is to well define the failure, the distance of the failure, how this failure really affects the environment, and then do all the things that I need to improve, as I said, the introduction to define all this path that I want to walk, because I have a broad view to work. Then I need to focus in a small part. But I believe when I with all these suggestions that it's been doing here. When I define the failure and the impact of failure, I think it would be easier to answer all this kind of performance of the recovery strategy in all the scenarios. But I intend to evaluate all the failure in all the scenarios.
Very good, very good. Okay. So as for the research question 3. So maybe if you try to refactor them in a different way, since your purpose is to analyze the complexity of, let's say, the levels, let's say, how you perform as you go through complex, let's say, ways for you to analyze the strength of your contribution. Maybe if you just try to refactor a bit the question.
Maybe one point is to think about not about the performance of the recovery strategy, but considering the impact of failure in specific scenarios. I don't know if it's the same thing that you were saying, but the impact of agent removal may be bigger than an action removal or a state perturbation. I don't know if that's the point.
Yeah.
And about the third research question about the agent, I think one problem also, it's the agent removal. It's about the executors, not about the coordinator.
Yeah. So go back to what both, especially Leliane mentioned before, right? So this perspective of the coordinator, I think maybe because I mean there are a lot of things here because you also implement the simulator, right? So I think there is a contribution here.
I need it.
Yeah. So there is a contribution here that they are not addressed here in the research question as well. So because there are things that you may not be able to do in a simulator, and there are research challenges. Research questions that have to address that. For example, is it possible first to simulate this kind of failures in these environments that you have given, and even is it possible for you to how feasible it is for you to have these let's say to see about the replanning and the recovery itself in there, because these require two different mechanisms. This requires some monitoring information, and this requires some different knowledge for you to do some actions, either to replan or to recover, right? So there are some challenges here, and not to mention there's something here that I'm not sure how far you went through that, how generalizable your simulation is, right? Of course, it depends on the level of abstraction that you want to represent in your simulation. But I think your simulation could also be part of your research questions, because there are some since you had to implement it, and if you did the homework, which I'm sure that you did, there are something that's missing in the literature that you didn't find that you had to do it, right? And what's the thing that there was missing in the literature that you had to do? And I do think that the simulation could not only be part of the evaluation itself, but it could also be part of the contribution of what you did, because I'm sure that you did a lot of effort to simulate this. And not to mention that you need to provide some quantitative analysis on the results that you captured from the simulation, right? So, I mean, there are some things that you can do here, even like, for example, you can produce some results to do some quantitative analysis here that you could include in the simulation here. I'm not sure how coupled the quantitative analysis is here to the simulation.
Just after.
But you could do this, right?
Yes.
You could have an integration.
Yes.
But the nice thing here is like you monitor information, and you do some actions, you provoke some noises here in these environments, some perturbation in the environment, you produce some results as you showed here in these screens that you presented here, and there are some failures that represent here, and then you could integrate that with the analyzer, and then you could already have an environment that someone could say, maybe it could go towards the benchmark, right, in the future, depending on the information that have, the accuracy of the information that you have. And then you could even like ask people to try to run some experiments here, and then this could be already another contribution of your work. I don't know how.
At runtime.
Yes, exactly, right? So I think here you were thinking about coded only on the plan recovery and the recovery and the repair strategy, right? The replan and the recovery strategy. But I think your simulation could also be part of this contribution, because there is there's some knowledge representation, there is some monitoring needed here, and there is some even like some characterization you need to provide here, because you need to let's say to produce the data for them to either to failure or to succeed or so on and so forth. So I think this could also be explored in these 18 months you have ahead, and even like be part of some master thesis that the students that are already listening to us, they could also join this effort and they could help you on this direction, because I think there is a very nice contribution here, because there's a non-determinism here, but then if you could have also the quantitative analysis integrated into that, I think this would be very nice for you to help people to, since this is a kind of hot topic that you have these days, this also be a nice contribution that's not addressed in any of the questions as far as I can see here, right? Okay. Okay, so moving towards my last question here. Since you already did you provided here the R2, right, values here, I was wondering, why didn't you perform the F test here in the evaluation? You were about to do that, but I didn't see why you didn't go ahead, especially when you have like the results on table 8, then you have like, yes, actually this is kind of the various questions that I have here in this sense, but I think we could maybe talk offline about this, but at least to maybe clarify here, why didn't you go towards the last step? Because you have the R2, great, but the R2 for the other ones, for example, for cluster 1, cluster 2, cluster 3, they're not bad at all. I think they are like above, let's say 90%. Most of them, even like the one that's like 84%, it's not bad at all. And some of the errors that you have here, the mean squared errors that you provide here, some of them, they're not bad even, like 1.7, 1.38. So there are some different magnitudes here, of course, but I was wondering, why didn't you perform the F test? And if it would be fair to compare cluster 1, cluster 2, and cluster 3, if I get it right. Why I mean this? Because maybe it depends, again, it depends on the kind of failures that you have here, the kind of possibilities that you're able to, let's say, to overcome here, and what kind of attributes that you're monitoring here. So there are situations that you may say, okay, this is the best strategy, but at some point, maybe, like, let's say I have the 5 best would be the best way to go, because they have different issues that they take into account. And then depending on the situation, maybe I would go better, I would fit better in one of the other clusters, right? So instead of having like the top one, I would say, okay, I have some different options here. And I didn't, as I mentioned, I could go through much in detail in here, but when we see like cluster 1, cluster 2, cluster 3, say, okay, so what's wrong with if you'd have, for example, the initial plan length in the polynomial model have in R2 0.98 and the mean square 1.79, right? So there are some things here that, because let's say these results, they are non-deterministic, right? So maybe because this depends on the set of data that you have, right? And maybe if you change a bit the set of data, you may end up in a different result, which is not really say, okay, this is the, let's say, this is not, let's say, how can I say, you cannot discard this option because in a different scenario, this could be one option to go, right? So do you understand what I mean? So it's like, first, why didn't you go through the F test? And second, why you have to say that this one is the best compared to the other one? So is that, do they, so let's say, so do they start from the same point, or do they have things that they differ from them that say, okay, I can compare the 3 of them because they are exactly using the same values, and then I can say that this one is the top best?
Okay. About the second question, that I will start with the second question. Why didn't I compare the cluster 1, cluster 2? The reason that, as I said, I try to build classes of problem according to the number of public actions. Then I consider that cluster 1, it's one scenario, one class of problem. Then I did all the evaluations just considering the configurations that respect that level of the public action, that cluster condition. About the first question about the test, the thing that the roadmap that I did many tests to decide what would be the best approach to follow. Okay. Then I simulate all the case studies, for example, of cluster 1, with the same start points in the different simulation conditions, the failure probability, the recovery strategies, but always starting with the same point, the same planning problem.
Do you mean the same attributes in the same setting, or do you have different settings for cluster 1, cluster 2, and cluster 3?
Different settings because the planning problem are different.
Yeah, so that's what I mean. It's like because I'm not sure that you're comparing the things in the right way, but okay, I get what you mean.
I just try to compare similar things about the Then I did the R2. I found the R2 values, but then I remember that R2 is not alone. It's not so good. Then I try to understand the dispersion part too. Then I had another test that is
Wilcoxon
text, because I couldn't guarantee the normal distribution of the sample. Then I did this test too, just to guarantee that all the data that was provided by the simulation was not provided by chance. So I did this test just to provide that, and I compared the performance according to the.
And by the way, it's misspelled here. It should be Wilcoxon.
This word is terrible to write and to say.
It's Wilcoxon.
Then I compared
just to fix it. It's mixing a C before the OX. Okay.
Okay, I will write it correctly.
Okay.
But I compared the values according to the mean values of all the results of the simulations. Of course, I can improve this simulation, this evaluation part, but it's the beginning.
All right.
I can do. As I said, I was defining the best approach to evaluate the results.
Yeah. I really need to go further in this class. Perspective, I'm not sure that they are much comparable among themselves, because I think they have different. I think they have
coordination complexity.
Different coordination complexity. So I don't think that it would be fair to compare among themselves. I think it's kind of not like the global. Let's say the best. So I'm not sure that it's better to have like
I did this test too. I tried when I tried to build the regression models. I tried to build one regression model for each variable that I need to predict in each cluster. That was the table 8. I believe it's the best results. But I also
I'm sure it wasn't.
Then I tried to the code that I did to build all this evaluation part. I prepare for a single model for a single class, but I try to find a global model too. But it's not so easy to find a good global model for all the clusters.
Yeah, I don't think that would be a good idea. But it would be a good idea, for example, if you did maybe like a factorial analysis, and then you could say, okay, these are the attributes that make the most.
I did that. I did a square of the impact of each factor, each variable on each variable.
Well, this would be really nice, because then based on the variable that you have, then you can say, let's say,
I use this most important factor in each model. But it was very difficult to show all the square, because I think it's a grid with 20. But I knew that it was that, and I did that.
This is crazy. Goodness. No, I would suggest you to, for example, to rank the first 5 at most.
I will try to show just.
Okay. At least show the let's say the high and of these variables, because usually, unless you have a very, very complex environment, you don't need more than, let's say, 5 or even 7 variables, because then the error, I mean, would be really, really high, even for you to tune in them all, right?
I don't know if you can see the square.
It's reloading here. I will resize it. Okay.
Yes,
wow. So let's say, okay.
Try to build the correlation between 2 different variables of the model.
All right.
Then I use the most important here. It's more or less the darker.
Yeah, except for the one that goes in diagonal of this matrix. Okay.
Yeah, it's.
Right, I see what you mean.
Compare the same thing.
Oh, I see.
And I did that for the 3 clusters and to a global approach, and the global approach not so good.
So this is a correlation matrix, right? So then,
yes.
Okay. So then, for example, I would suggest you to get the I don't know, try to pick at least some of them. Take like the one that go. Of course, you need to do a ranking here. All, for example. Take all the red ones, for example,
yeah,
or the dark red ones that goes like from a particular number here, and just say like, okay, now so at least for you to do some exercise here, so to say how good would be the results based on these, right? And then based on that, then you could probably improve and get better better results, because there is a lot of correlation here, I see.
Yes.
Right, there's a lot of correlation here, so it is very likely that you end up, so let's say how many you have here.
You used some of those, no? You used time initial plan. You used it to evaluate.
Yeah, because here I see like, yes, it's very likely that you would end up having, because as I count here, there are 10, right? 10,
12,
yeah. So it's very likely that you'll be able to trim them down. So for example, if you take like the one that have higher correlation here, that you may end up trimming down here to a much smaller number of attributes here, and also not only the correlation, but also this part of it, but also the ones that would be the with the highest highest impact, right? So then maybe that, I mean, there are very nice things that you can do here, and I'm glad that you was worried about this. And this also was part of the question that I was going to ask you to re-explain the regression models, because they were very black box to me. It was just like, okay, I go from here and I reach there. There are these models and these are the results. And of course, I was curious to see what was the process for you to getting through these regression models. It's like, I know you already know Supervisor. I'm sure that you did the steps of it. And you were a student of the class that I taught, and you did perform very well. But still, I was missing the between steps that you had here. But I do think there is some promising things that you do this for you to, once you do this classification, you know more where you start from, how you, let's say, tweak these variables, how do you make the noises happen here, and how do you generate these results. And it's very likely that it will be clear in the end how you reach to a very interesting way to see that. I'm not sure if you can say like replanning or recovery, but you can either do this or that, but it depends on how much you want to compromise yourself on this, or how much you are able to use one or the other, right? So like,
that's the reason to use the regression.
Very nice, very nice, very nice. I really appreciate that. Enjoyed it. I wish I could go much further on this, but if I did, then the questions here would be like at lunchtime and still having questions, but just mostly for clarification. I have to confess, I really enjoyed the text. I find it quite well written. At least I could understand what you mentioned, but things that I was in doubt was mostly towards the scientific contribution of it, but you were in, let's say, in good hands. And if there is anything that I can help, of course, you guys can count on me. I'm just, just nearby. Okay. And thank you very much for this Viva. And I'm sure that you have a very nice work in your PhD. Okay.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you, Genaina. Thank you very much for all your comments. I think what we have to learn and take care here from your perspective is to characterize better the problem, to define better what the kind of failures we are dealing with, and the relation of noise and failure and recalibration and behavior adaptation. I mean, I took lots of notes, and we are going to talk about that later. Okay, thank you very much. Now, let's see who is still here. Jefferson, Jonah, Leonardo. We should decide, talk privately. So I'm going to put with 4 in another room. Okay, so we can talk and deliberate about his final decision for this Viva. Is that all right? When I move,
you can leave the room too, if you prefer.
No, but there are 3 of you here. Jefferson, Jonathan, too. They are here. So let me see what's Jefferson.
Jonathan
Jonathan just left. So maybe it's easier if you leave.
Then I wait for your WhatsApp notification.
Okay, to coming back. Okay.
Okay, I'm leaving now.
All right. Thank you for being here, for learning a lot with this Bible. So if you could leave, thank you very much.
Thank you. Be kind with me. So, thank you a lot for all the.
It's a pleasure.
Time. I will do my best to do the best. I work a lot to build a good work and with important contributions to the area. So thank you very much.
You will. I'm sure you will.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you all.
Congratulations, Celia, also.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
More 18 months to come.
More 18.
Yes. Take a deep breath and go ahead. Yes.
Okay. Bye, you all. Genaina, sign, please, the ata